Okay, we're back. It's been a little while since I started this video, and I've had a chance to look at what I've done so far. A lot of my designing is sort of a work in progress, so I'll adapt and make changes as I go along. And the one thing I noticed after looking at this piece for a while was that I feel like the basket is a little flat. So I want to go back and add some shading on the far right and far left side of the basket. I know it's a little more difficult at this point because we're going to have to work around the elements, but I think it would give the basket a little more dimension, so I'm just going to do some light glazes of color, some darker of the umbers over the outside. Our light source was sort of from the right, and so we need to have more dark here on the left and a little bit more dark here on the right, and try to keep our center of interest here towards the just right of center. So to do this, I'm going to go back to the faux finish medium that we were using to do our floating, and I'm just using like a 1/2 inch flat brush, and I'm going to come along and put a light coat of that faux finish medium here on the right side of the basket. And I'm going to spread it over a little farther than what I think I want the shading to be, but it's nice to have that wet surface to blend the paint into so you don't get a hard line. So I'm going to use a 1/2 inch flat to do the float. And so I'm adding a little bit of that faux finish medium to that brush also. And I'm going to start by picking up some, I think I'll go with the burnt umber initially. We'll see how that looks. So I'm going to side load the brush with some burnt umber, blend that out well into the brush. And then come along and add that color here on the right side. Just walking it down from the edge. I'm going to just kind of try to work in between these vines so I'm not shading all those in the berries. I don't want to go over top of those. And walk it out a little bit into that wet medium that we put down. And I'm brushing fairly hard to get that to move. Over these brown leaves it really doesn't matter because they're about the same color as what we're putting over, so it won't hurt if you go over those. So we're going to let that set up. If you would get a hard line, you can always use a mop brush to soften that. I like these Deco Art Traditions blender mops. They're kind of an oval top. They're real soft and velvety. They've got a little bit more body than some of the mop brushes do, but they still are real fine and give you a nice blend if you need it. So I'm just tapping up and down with that brush to soften that shading into the background. So we're going to repeat this on the left side in the same manner, but we're going to have to work around the crow. But I'm going to just brush this medium right over top of everything because it's clear. It doesn't matter if we get that on the crow and the raffia. And I'm going to bring that out almost halfway across the basket. Again, I'm going to load my angle brush with some of the medium. You can see I've still got some of that burnt umber in there. Just try to keep the short edge of your brush clean. It's not going to be real important because we're working on a brown surface to begin with. And then I want to just add some of this burnt umber here on the left side of the basket. I'm going to try to work around the raffia. Not quite so much a side load on some of these areas, but as you get out towards the middle and to the front of the crow, you can use more of a side load stroke. Come back here along underneath him. Kind of dry in here today, so my paint's tacking up pretty fast. Just a touch of water to the brush. And again, it doesn't matter if I go over the dark leaves and vines, I just don't want to go on over my light, excuse me, colors. Or the berries, I don't want them toned down so much. So when I'm getting down in between, I'm just sort of dabbing in with the tip of the brush to add some of that dark shadow. And again, if you get any variation in the color that you don't like, just use the mop brush and tap that, and that'll soften it into your background, into that faux finish medium. I think we're going to let that dry and do a second coat, and maybe move up to the raw umber just to add a little more darkness. But I also want to do some here on the basket rim, especially this little outer area. Where the rim overlaps. So I've added a little of the faux finish medium and come back here and just float some of that down around that outer edge. This edge of the rim is going to be pretty much darker, and just you don't have to worry about a whole lot of variation in color. And we can again repeat on the left side also. Bring that shading in a little more. So I think it's always a good thing as you work on a design, step back and walk away and look at it after you've gotten so far, and see if all your pieces seem to hang together. When I took a picture of this and I put it on my Facebook page, with it partially done, as soon as I put it on the computer, it seemed like it really stood out to me that we've got a lot of highlighting and shading going on in the pears and stuff, and the basket was shaded, but it was kind of an even shading. We weren't really showing a variation due to the light source. So that's why I felt like we needed to come back and deepen the shading on the sides. Let's try this one more time. And again, I'm not bothering to clean my brush, I want to make sure this faux finish medium on the first layer is dry. But like I said, seems pretty dry here today, so I'm tacking up really fast. So I'm going to put a little more over top of that. And I'm going to come back and add a little bit of the raw umber, which is a little darker brown than the burnt umber is. You can see on the palette as I'm side loading, there's a little bit of variation. The burnt umber has more of a red brown, and the raw umber seems to have a little more, I guess, maybe a black in it. It's a cooler brown than the burnt umber is. And again, just coming in and doing kind of a glaze over this area. Work in between the vines. You don't want to come over too far on this right side. And I'm going to tap that out with a blender mop to soften that. And you can see where we're getting a little bit darker shading now on this side. And we're staying a little lighter here in the center. So we're going to, again, repeat this on the left side. And because I'm drying so quick, I'm just adapting this a little bit and adding a touch of water to the brush before I load it with the medium. I'm going to brush down almost to the center. Put some more full finish medium in the brush and side load again with burnt or raw umber. And then I want to just add this glaze of color to the left side, coming out about a third of the way across the basket. Stay off the rim some. And again, I'm going right over the dark vines and trying to stay off the berries and the light colored vines so much. If you get onto like the wrappy or whatever, you can always later go back and touch that up if you need to, the liner brush. You can see now we've got the sides are darker and we've got a little bit more light here in the center. So the basket's getting a little bit more of a turned look. It's not so flat. And we could even come back here and just glaze over the side of the basket rim a little bit. Keep that a little more transparent. You want it toned down, but not quite as dark as the shading is, because we do want that little overlap to have a bit of a highlight. Just go back and add a little bit more of that raw umber to the side of the rim. All my paintings are done with lots and lots of layers. I go back and forth, trying to get the degree of lightness or darkness that I like. Extend this out just a little farther this way on the rim. I think that's a little better for right now. I might, as we move on, come back and, dry brush a little bit more highlight here in the center after that glazing dries to just emphasize the highlight right here in this area, where I feel like the basket should be catching the light that's coming from this side. So, but we'll leave that set up for right now, and I'm going to put it aside, clean my brushes, and the next thing we're going to do is work on the banner that goes with this piece. I'll set my brushes over here for a second. Set the sign aside to dry. And this piece, we have a ribbon banner that's going to be wired to the top of the sign. And this was another thing I've been thinking about over the past week or two since I had to stop and take a break from the video and do other work, is what color I wanted the banner to be. And at first I was going to do it in a green color that was similar to the tabletop. And I kept going back and forth, and finally I decided that, I really didn't want the banner to be that much of a contrast. So I have based it with Americana sand, which is what we started with in the base coat for the whole sign. And so I'm going to try to keep it similar in value to the lace bottom. So I based it in sand, sanded it down with a fine sanding pad, and we are going to now do some shading on it to give it the effect that this is a ribbon that kind of is folded back on the ends with the little tails coming out. Now on a banner like this, on the ends here where the wood's cut, kind of gives you the right place where you want to assume that the ribbon is folded. So I'm going to just take a pencil and do a real fine pencil line coming down from that cut and just angling in just slightly towards the bottom. And then on the end here, you bring it in at a curve. Just curve that in. And then across the center here, you need to come across and continue that same line at an angle. And you're almost going to do like a little backwards C, or a U on its side. So that's going to give you the effect of this ribbon turning back and then coming back out on itself. And you're going to repeat the same thing on the opposite side. So again, using the guideline from where the cut is, just going to, let's see, doing that, turn it upside down, it's a little hard. I want that to angle in just a slight bit more towards the center. And right maybe a quarter of an inch, eighth of an inch from the bottom, I'm going to swing that in and turn that edge towards the middle. Again, we're going to continue the cut line here with a pencil mark. Bring it in not quite to our pencil line, and then turn it and make a U shape and back towards the middle. And those are the guidelines that we're going to use to add our shading. I think on this one, when we were working on the bottom of the banner, on the shading, we used raw sienna, which is kind of a honey brown color that complements the background color of sand. So I'm just going to come along here and float a shade on the outside of that pencil line. And this will probably take 2 or 3 coats, so just And to get your shading established on one side, and go back and add some on the other. And this time I'm just using some water to do this float. You can use the Faux finish medium if that's easier. We're going to again float down that pencil line, and our paint edge of brush is towards the middle up against the line, and then as we get to the bottom it's just curving back in. And that one got a little darker, and so I need to go back over this one on this side. Like I said, this can take several coats if you need to build it up. You're better off doing it in multiple light layers than trying to do it all at one time in one heavy layer. You'll get a much prettier, smoother float by building up the layers. It's like each successive layer just smooths out the overall shading. Okay, we're going to do the same thing on this little inner curve. It's just a little tight area to work in, so you can move to a smaller brush if it's more comfortable, but I'm just kind of pulling in a C-stroke motion, so the shading is up against the top line, curves around the bottom of the U or C, and back along the bottom. And this can be pretty dark inside. You don't need to worry about a lot of variation in color. You'll just have a little bit of lightness at the inner edge. To the other side. Again, floating up along the top. Swing around the end. And pull back along the bottom line. Okay, so you can see now we're getting more dimension to the banner. Now we can add some highlighting to this by moving to a lighter value, and it works really nice to just put that right up against your shading. And so I'm going to side load with white, and if that gets too stark you can always add just a touch of the raw sienna or even your sand background color to it. And we're going to, let's first shade along the top here. We're going to and I've got a lot of water in my brush. So we're just going to come along that top edge. Add some more paint and go back over it one more time. Start from this side. Because I had so much water, that stays pretty wet, so it doesn't hurt to go immediately back over it. Okay, well let that dry, and let's shade the ends of the ribbon. I'm just going to touch out on the ends and back along this notched out area. There's not a real stark contrast between the white and the sand background, so you shouldn't get too much of a contrast. The banner's not really the focus of the whole design, so you don't want it to get too contrasty. edges are dry now, you can go back and again float against our shading. Let's see, we'll first start here along the bottom, and I'm going to start here on this outer edge. Bring that around. I'm still on and out of phone call again. So I'm back here again. And we'll get back to this floated highlight on the banner. Again, we're side loading with white. You can see I always try to work, when I'm using a color, work in the same track on my palette. You keep the paint in your brush, not spread all over the palette. You don't use as much of your palette, and I find I have to clean my brush less often if I can be consistent in where I'm stroking on the palette. So let's go this opposite direction. Touch. I'm going to put some highlight here above, around that C stroke, and then along the bottom of the banner, and meet where we left off before my phone call. Okay, so we're getting a little bit here. The final thing we're going to do is do some shading here on the ends. And again, just we're staying with the white, and I'm going to just bring this highlight up here along this folded edge of the banner. So our white is up against that. We're all seeing a shading that we just did at that pencil line. And up the other side. Now, the final thing I'd like to do is put some highlighting right here in the center. And it's always a little more difficult to do a highlight at the middle of something because you don't have any sharp edges that you can work against. So let's add some, we are dry here now. Let's add some of this faux finish medium here in the middle. And then use some type of like a dome blender brush to, I'm going to add a little bit of faux finish medium to that. Pick up some of the white on that brush and pounce it, and then pounce it here in the middle. Start where you want the strongest highlight, and then as your paint starts coming off the brush a little bit, it'll get a little bit lighter. You can also let up on how hard you press or pounce the brush, and taper that so that it softens out as it goes to either side. We'll get some of that placed, and then come back with the dome blender brush, and I'm really pouncing hard on that to soften that highlight into that faux finish medium background. And I'm losing some hairs in here, so don't worry about that. you can always wait till it dries and brush them off. Now you can see on this side, I didn't bring that faux finish medium out quite far enough. That's why it's really important to bring it out beyond where you want your color to end, because as long as you have some of that clear medium on the surface, you can soften that edge into that clear and so you don't get a hard line. So we're gonna let this set up and dry and probably go over that one more time to smooth it out a little bit more. But now, once it sets up, you can, if you get any loose hairs from your mop brush, you can brush them off. Sometimes these mop brushes tend to shed a lot, especially when they're newer. So you can see I'm getting a little bit splotchy here, so I'm going to come back and soften that with another layer. So we're going to take a break, let that set up a second, and then I'll come back with a new layer of the highlighting on there. Okay, through the speed of a hairdryer, I've got that dry quickly, and I'm going to, again, put some faux finish medium over this area, being sure to take it out closer to the edges so that we don't get any hard lines when we stop applying the white color. We've got our Dome Blender brush loaded with some of the faux finish medium, a little bit of white. We're going to come back and tap this into that background that's already wet, the medium. Try to soften those colors together so we get a nice gradient. It's lighter in the center and softens as it comes out to the edges. Okay, so that's looking a little better. We'll add a little bit more white over here. Just really barely touching the surface on these edges just to fade that color out. This bit away, and now we've got a banner that's highlighted in the center with some white. Has the shading to show our turns, and again is a nice blend with our lace border at the bottom so that it doesn't jump out at us and become too prominent. If you like, at this point, you can reinforce the shading. I would like to go back and do a little bit more shading on these inside folds. I'm pretty happy with the outside. But, it just depends on your piece, how much you've added, how much shading you started with, whether you need to reinforce that a little bit. I'm just going to put another coat over these ends, because that would be the darkest area of shading on this. And to get nice, smooth, floated shading also, the other key is to make sure you start with a smooth surface. So I always seal, base coat, and sand in between the layers. so that I'm starting with a nice smooth background. If you have a lot of texture, a lot of grain that's raised up, you're going to get a lot of paint catching in that. That's going to give it a splotchy look. So now we've got our banner background painted, and we want to add some lettering to it. Now for the lettering, I always try to play and do my lettering. You know, if I can't find a stencil that I like that's someone else that I can purchase somewhere, I'll play in Photoshop and make up my own lettering, and that's what I did in this case. And because I just recently got a cutting machine, I am able to cut my own stencils. So this project I decided to call Pearberry Blessings, kind of tying into the theme, which is the basket of pears and the grapevine with the little bittersweet berries that are around the bottom. And I was able to create a stencil by laying it out in Photoshop that I liked and cut that on my new cutter. You know, I do have these stencils available in the store if you'd like to purchase one. You know, it makes your lettering a lot faster to add than trying to sit and paint all these different letters. And I have created this shape to specifically fit this banner. So the letters are arched. They fit right in between our shaded and highlighted areas. And you can just lay that over, you know, center it, you know, how you like. And we're ready to stencil our lettering. Now, I like to use these dome blenders to stencil also. And I'd like to use a color because initially I was thinking about doing the banner in that bluish green color that we had used for the tabletop. I think I want to do the lettering in that color, just to tie the top of the banner in with the bottom of our design. So I want to keep it sort of transparent, so I'm going to add a little bit of the Faux finish medium. I don't want this real solid, and that color was a mix of our phthalo blue and a little bit of the raw umber. It gives us that pretty kind of dirty blue-green. It's a real nice antique primitive color. So, you know, if you don't have a dome blender or you have one of those little finger pouncers, sponges, those also work really well for stencils. But I'm just going to come along and just pounce up and down on this stencil very lightly. You don't want that paint seeping under. And I want to keep that color sort of variegated and soft. So first I'm gonna keep this color more to the bottom of the letters. Leave a little bit of the top open for right now. We're gonna do a variation in color on this so that we have kind of a gradient color going on in our stencil. So again, just tapping along the bottom of these letters, leaving some of the top open. If you need to pick up a little more paint, you know, feel free to do that. Again, we're using some raw umber and a little bit of the phthalo blue to get that dirty blue-green color. you can tape the stencil in place, or I'm just trying to hold it real tightly with my finger so it doesn't slip around. And I'm just tapping up and down with the brush. But again, you can see I'm leaving the top edge of these letters open and not covering the whole letter with this blue-green. Let's do a little bit up here on berry. And then I'd like to add a little bit of that rosy, again, just leaving the stencil in place. If it was taped, that would probably be even better, so you don't have to worry about it slipping. I'm going to clean that brush out a little, and I want to go to a little bit of that red color that we put on the pears to give them that rosy red, and that was our naphtha red light. And I want to tone it down a little bit by just putting in a little bit of raw umber. We don't want that to be too bright. Just kind of a toned red color. Again, coming back, and I'm just going to now go around the top edge of those letters that I didn't stencil previously. And you can overlap where you've stopped the blue-green and started the red so that it looks like a gradient where they're blending together. And hopefully this will look really pretty when we're finished. As I said, I usually design as I go along, so sometimes it's experimentation. I'm just sort of brush mixing this as I go. It seems to be running out of paint pretty quickly because I'm using such tiny little amounts. If you feel more comfortable, you can mix you up a little puddle with a palette knife to start with, so you have the same value to work with each time. Sometimes I like the variation of brush mixing as I go along, so it doesn't look so regular. This is a very fine stencil, so the letters are going to be very delicate. I'm going to edge up and see how that looks. And I think we've got enough color. So I do like, I like stenciling letters, but I also like to add a little bit of shading or outlining to them, because that kind of takes away the look that it's stenciled and can give you a look that's like it's more been hand painted. You get the ease of stenciling, but you still want it to look very handcrafted. So I think, you know, what I'll do next is go back with a small angle brush and add some shading on the background behind these letters so they pop out a little bit more. So I'm going to take a break and let the stenciling dry so that we don't disturb it. And then we'll come back and add a little more shading to this and probably a little bit of outlining, highlights. So let's take a few minute break and we'll be back. Okay, we seem to be pretty dry, and I'm going to add a little bit more Faux finish medium to my little cup in my palette here. And I've got a 1/4 inch Traditions angle brush. I'm going to load that with some of the Faux finish medium here on my palette. I don't want too much, that'll cause ridges, but just have enough in the brush to make it moist. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of the raw sienna, which is our kind of honey brown color. And you know, any of my paintings, I tend to use just pretty basic colors. So if you don't use Traditions paint, you can always substitute Americano or any, you know, acrylics or watercolors. I use mostly the traditional colors like raw umber, raw sienna, burnt umber, burnt sienna. So they're pretty universal, regardless of what brand of paint you're using, you can find something comparable. So I'm going to go along here and just shade here to the left side of the strokes of the letter. Again, with the Faux finish medium and the brush, it really holds that paint in place on your brush. It's a nice texture and gives you a very pretty smooth float that doesn't seem to get out of control like sometimes water can run a little too much. Just get over to the left side, just taper that shading out on the top of your letters. And I'm not cleaning my brush, I'm just reloading after a few strokes just to refresh the paint so that it stays about the same value. So I'm going to jump around in these because, like, if I tried the float here on the E to the left, I would be running into this P that I first did that may not be totally dry yet. So you can jump around on your shading so that you're not overlapping a wet stroke and destroying what you've just put down. refresh your brush with some more Faux Finish Medium and the raw umber whenever you need to. If you feel like your strokes are getting too light. If you'd like different words on your banner, I really encourage you to experiment with your computer. You can always create all kinds of interesting text and fonts, to do your own letterings. If you don't have the stencil, you can just trace it in and then color book it in with a round or a small flat brush. I really like playing with fonts and the layout of lettering, and that's why when I was doing this one, I knew in my head that I wanted Pearberry to have the B common between Pearberry and Blessing, so it was just a matter of continuing to play and move the letters around to get an arrangement I liked. I think Photoshop's a photo editing program, and I find it easier sometimes to do graphic lettering like this in a program like that than trying to do it in a word processing program, because you have more control over positioning where your words or letters are and arcing them on a different path, so that if you want something arched, you can't always easily do that in just a straight word processing program. If you get too much of that paint seeping across, I just add a little bit of water to the brush, and that's what happens. It seems like the water makes the paint seep across the brush a little more. I just pinched out that side that I wanted to be clean. Doing this when you're shading on the left side, you're probably better off starting on your letters to the right and working from right to left. And that keeps you from working in wet paint. Where I was anxious and started out on my P first. And you have to take a break and move away from that so you don't step in what you've just done. If you start to the right side and work left, it's just a natural progression, and you're not trying to work into the wet paint. Stop and take a break and look and figure out when I'm jumping around like this, what pieces have I missed? And I see that I haven't done this E to the left, or the R. Some of these are just a little hint of shading. You don't. I think I've gotten everything there. I might later look and see something I've missed, but you can see where we've added some shading back in, and it's kind of picked up your background and actually made that highlighted area, you know, focus a little bit more. So the only last thing I think I'd like to do is maybe add a little fine white highlight on each of the letters. I think black might be a little too strong, but I'm thinking if I took a real fine liner brush and did a little white stroke on the right side of each letter, it might make them pop out. So I think that's what we'll do next. Okay, I got my liner brush. I like these really fine liners. This one's 20 odd. It's a Royal Majestic, and probably only has about 5 hairs or whatever, but you know, you can get a really nice fine line with that. And on liner work, I do like to use water because you want your paint to really flow out very evenly, and you want it, you know, to do that you need it to be very thin, like an ink. You know, something like the Faux Finish medium in this case would just make the paint too thick to get a real fine, even line. So you can see I'm just mixing this puddle on my palette, and I just keep going back between some white paint and some water and just stirring that together so that, you know, I'm getting a really just inky quality of white paint. And so now I'm going to see what this looks like if I come along, and I'm not totally outlining, I just really want to hit the far right areas, the right edge of each letter, and maybe the top, just to give a little hint of a highlight. When you're doing this really fine lining, you want to work right up on the very tip of your brush. If you try to lay your brush down, it'll just spread too much. You'll get a wider line, you know, as close to perpendicular probably as possible, with just a tiny slant. And just the very tip of the brush touching down. And I'm not totally outlining, I'm just kind of hitting where I think the light would touch the edges of the letter. So to the top, a little bit to the right. Like here, I probably came a little too far to the left side, so I'm going to just soften that away with my finger. And as you're doing this, you should, you know, one thing I try to remember is that if I'm jumping from one side to the other of a letter, you know, it's unlikely that the white is going to be on both sides of the letter. It's going to stop on one side and start on the other side. So, for instance, if I was going to come around the top of this G, you know, I'd come about halfway to the top edge. And then when I came to the inside of the G, I'd started about where I stopped it at the top. If that makes sense. same way here on, say, these S's. I'm, touching the top and stopping, and then I'm going to go to the right side and touch that, and then maybe do a little bit here on the top of the bottom swing. Like my paint is losing a little bit of pigment, so I need to add a little more water, more of the white paint back in, and a touch of water. At some point it gets down so thin to the bottom of the puddle that you don't have much pigment left. Let's go up here and do the berry. You can kind of see each little stroke that you add to lettering. It looks less stenciled and more like it's been hand painted. So there's the lettering with the shading and the highlighting. If you see spots that you feel like the white needs to be a little brighter, just very carefully go back and add a second layer to reinforce that white. Because it's so fine a line, sometimes you need a little second stroke over it. But you do want to be careful not to let it spread. You don't want big heavy white lines. Sometimes you have to let things dry a little bit because, I find that acrylic paints, when you first put them down, sometimes they look very strong and with a lot of contrast, but it seems like by the time they actually dry and set up a little bit, the colors will sort of settle down and merge together, and you may need a second layer over it that, maybe initially you didn't see that you needed. So I think that's about it for now. If you wanted to add any stronger shadows or stronger detail on the lettering, you could maybe go back and add a real fine, dark, maybe the raw umber line on the left side of the letter to separate where your shadows are. I think I'm gonna think about that for a minute and decide whether I want that much contrast or not. Let's try it with the banner first and see how this looks. I'm thinking that might look pretty good. It gives you, blends into the sign without jumping out at you too much. It still lets the basket be the focal point. And that's what I was worried about, if I had used stronger colors in the banner, that it might detract from the basket. Turn this one light off, see if we have a little less glare. These little dust lights that are shining down on this, and it's kind of hard to get the full effect of what this is going to look like, but I think that maybe helps. So I think for mine, I think I'm going to leave it at this. I don't know that I want any more detail on the banner. The only other thing, I just remembered what I had planned to add was I'm going to do some, and we'll do this in the next stage, I'm going to do some little berries and leaves. I think I'm going to add a little set right here and maybe a set right here, just to add a little bit more detail. And I'm going to, keep the berries, in these peachy colors, peachy reds, but keep them transparent, and then do some leaves, but rather than do the dark colored leaves that we've used on the sign, or down in the grapevine, I think I'm going to keep them more in the green colors of the basket, or in the green colors that we've used on the lettering, so that they still don't have too much contrast. But I thought a little cluster of berries here and one here, and maybe 2 leaves and maybe 1 leaf up here would be a pretty little addition to make that sign a little more special. So I'm going to take a break and let this set up, and then we'll come back and add some berries and leaves to the sign. And at that point, I think we'll be done, except for, I think, adding a little bit more of a highlight down here in this area of the basket, just to strengthen that a little bit. So it kind of ties into the stronger highlights on the pears. So we'll be back after a short break.